A recipe for Irish potato casserole is, and the source is publicdomainreceipts.com, that it takes a preparation time of 5 minutes, a cooking time of 45 minutes, and it should give servings of 6. The ingredients are 2 cups peeled and shredded potatoes, a half cup shredded sharp cheddar cheese, a half cup melted butter, a half cup milk, 2 beaten eggs, 1 minced teaspoon onion, 1 teaspoon salt, a half teaspoon paprika. Then how it should be done: first, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius. Then, butter a 1.5 liter baking dish. Then mix and combine the potatoes, the butter, the eggs, the onions, the salt and the paprika in a separate bowl. Then, place the potato mixture into the baking dish and add the milk on top. Then bake it for 40 minutes in the oven. After we take it out of the oven, sprinkle the cheese on top and put it back into the oven until the cheese has melted and is slightly browned.
A little overview of the early history of Britain. So during the Stone Age, around 10,000 years ago, Britain was not separated through the Channel from Europe, and the people just followed the deer and horse herds. Then around 6,000 years ago, the first farmers arrived, and they came probably from southeastern Europe. And these farmers, they built houses, tombs and monuments, and one of these monuments, that is Stonehenge in Wiltshire, which was probably used for seasonal ceremonies. And they also lived in a village called Scarborough, which is off the coast of Scotland on Orkney Island, and that helps to give archaeologists an overview of how the people lived during the time. Then 4,000 years ago, the Stone Age happened, and the people were starting to make tools, ornaments and beautiful things out of bronze and gold. And then the Iron Age happened, and the people were making tools and weapons out of iron. They grouped more together in larger settlements, and that is, for example, then Maiden Castle, an impressive hill fort in Dorset. The language they spoke was Celtic, and it was similar to the other areas in Europe. And today, still in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, a similar language is spoken to Celtic. They started to make coins, they minted coins, and on these coins they had the heads of their kings. And that is the beginning of British history, according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 12 and 13. In the year 1745, there had happened that the Jacobites in Scotland tried again to put James or his children onto the throne in Britain. Jacobites were the people who wanted James II or his children on the throne in Britain, and the grandson of James II was it who they wanted to have back on the throne. His name, so the name of the grandson of James II, who was supported by the Jacobites in Scotland, was Charles Edward Stuart, or also called Bonnie Prince Charlie. So Bonnie Prince Charlie had the support of the Scottish clans, and there was an uprising, and also a big battle happened, the Battle of Culloden in 1746, where the clansmen lost. Bonnie Prince Charlie fled back to Europe, and the clans were punished in a way. So the chieftains of the clans became landlords, but only if they had the favor of the British king. And the clansmen became tenants, and they had to pay for the land on which they were doing farming. And also at the time, a process known as the Highland Clearance began, the Highland Clearance. And in that, the smaller farms, known as crofts, so these crofts, small farms, were destroyed to create large areas of grazing land for large flocks of sheep and cattle. And it was also a time when many people from Scotland left Scotland to settle in North America. And that is according to the Life UK Test Handbook, page 34 and 35. Dame Mary Peevers. She was born in Manchester, and as a child she moved to Northern Ireland. She was an athlete, and in 1972 she won the gold medal in pentathlon. These are 5 different disciplines, for example, running, distance jumping and throwing, and the person who's the best one in all together combined wins then the gold medal in pentathlon. And after that she started to raise money for local athletes, and she became the leader of a women's British Olympic team. She promotes tourism and sport activities for Northern Ireland, and in recognition of that work, she was in the year 2000 made a Dame, so Dame Mary Peevers. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 57. When and with what result was the Brexit? It was on the 23rd June 2016, and 51.9% voted to leave the European Union. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook on the page 60. The devolved administrations in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has 4 regions, and one of them is England. There's the UK government in London. But there then are also Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. In Scotland, there's the Scottish Parliament as a devolved administration. In Wales, there is the Senate, and in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Assembly. Devolved administration, that means they have got some power to govern in that region. That means the Senate in Wales can govern on some things in Wales, and the Scottish Parliament on some things in Scotland, and the Northern Ireland Assembly on some things in Northern Ireland. Some things are still governed by the central government in London. For example, defence, or social security, or foreign affairs. They are all governed in London. But these 3 devolved administrations, they have also some rights. For example, the Senate in Wales, they can do education and training on that subject, or on health and social security, or on economic development, or on housing. They can govern on that parts. The ones in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, they can govern on civil and criminal law, and education, planning, and health, and also on additional tax-raising powers. They have also additional tax-raising powers. And the Northern Ireland Assembly, they can govern on education and agriculture, the environment, health, and social services. And they also have names. The people in the Senate, they are called SMs, Senate members. There are 60 of them. The 129 members of the Scottish Parliament are called MSPs, members of Scottish Parliament. And the 90 members of the of Northern Ireland Assembly are called MLAs, members of Legislative Assembly. And there was a Northern Ireland Parliament that was from 1922 until 1972. Today there's a Northern Ireland Assembly. In the past there was a Northern Ireland Parliament that was founded in 1922 with the Peace Treaty of 1922, which ended the guerrilla war. The Peace Treaty was in 1921, with the guerrilla war between Irish nationalists and the British ruling force. And that was then a peace treaty made in 1921, and Ireland was separated in 1922. The Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State, which is today the Republic of Ireland. So in 1922, there was then the Northern Ireland Parliament done, and it lasted until 1972. In 1969, the Troubles started, and that was a conflict between people who wanted whole Ireland to be independent of Britain and other peoples who wanted to stay in Britain. So it was suspended in 1972. But then, when all these devolved administrations were done, also the Senate in Wales and the Scottish Parliament in England, in Scotland, then when that was done in 1999, then also Northern Ireland got the Northern Ireland Assembly, which exists today. It was suspended from 2002 until 2007, but it exists. So, Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Assembly, in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, and in Wales, the Senate. And it's all part of the United Kingdom, mainly governed from London, from the main government. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook on several pages. Traditionally associated foods with the regions in England. So for example, England. Traditionally associated with England is fish and chips. And also something else, that is beef, roast beef together with vegetables and potato, and Yorkshire puddings. That is a batter heated in the oven. In Wales, Welsh cakes, and they can be eaten hot or cold, and they are flour, dry fruits and spices. In Scotland, haggis, and that is a sheep's stomach filled with offal, suet, onions and oatmeal. And in Northern Ireland, Ulster fry, and that is black pudding and white pudding, potato bread and sauerbraid, and mushrooms and tomatoes, and eggs, sausage and bacon. But in the United Kingdom are many more foods made, and oftentimes people are also inviting other people over, and then they're cooking dinner for all. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 89 and 90. Famous gardens in the United Kingdom which can be visited are Kew Gardens and Sissinghurst and Hitcote. They are in England. And in Scotland, Craves Castle and Inverary Castle. In Wales, Bodmin Garden. And in Northern Ireland, Mount Stuart. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 89. The 4 big regions of the United Kingdom have their own flowers. So England, the rose, Scotland, the thistle, Wales, the daffodil, and Northern Ireland, the shamrock. And sometimes on the nation Patron Saints days, the people are wearing these flowers. So all of these 4 regions have their own patron. England has St. George, and Scotland St. Andrew, Wales St. David, and Northern Ireland St. Patrick. And they all have a day. And on that day, they sometimes wear these flowers. So in England, St. George Day, on the 23rd April, the people are wearing sometimes a rose. Scotland, St. Andrew, the 30th November, the thistle. And Wales, the 1st March, St. David, and where it is the day, the daffodil. And in Northern Ireland on the 17th March, the shamrock, St. Patrick. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 89. Some battles in which Britain was involved. There was in 1066 the Battle of Hastings. There was the Norman conquest in that year, and William, Duke of Normandy, had come over to England and conquered a lot of England. And in that Battle of Hastings in 1066, he won against Harold the Saxon king, and he then conquered England, and he became William the Conqueror. Then the next battle, which is an example of a battle, is in 1314, in 1314. That is the Battle of Bannockburn. And in that, Robert the Bruce led the Scottish army against the English, and the Scottish army won. Another battle is Battle of Agincourt. That was in 1514. And where the vastly outnumbered troops of Henry V won against the French. But England nevertheless left France in the 1450s. There was another battle in 1485. That was the Battle of Bosworth Field. It was the decision-making battle of the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses were from 1455 until that battle, 1485, Battle of Bosworth Field. And in that battle, the leader of the House of York, they had the White Rose. King Richard III died, and the winner was the House of Lancaster with the Red Rose. And Henry Tudor, the leader of the House of Lancaster with the Red Rose, won, and he married then after the battle the niece of King Richard III. She was also of the House of Lancaster, of the House of York, and now the 2 houses were combined. That is the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. Another important battle was the Battle of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And in that the troops, or the troops of Elizabeth I, she was the reigning monarch in Britain at the time, won against the Spanish Armada. And that increased Elizabeth I's popularity a lot. They were sent out to restore Catholicism in England from Spain because Elizabeth I was Protestant. And another important battle was in 1646 too, the Battle of Nesby and of Marston Moor. That was the civil wars in England. There was Charles I, and he believed in the divine right of kings, and he didn't often come into an agreement with the Parliament. And then a civil war happened. And it was when the king, supported by the Cavaliers, against the Parliament, the Roundheads. And in the battles of Nesby and Marston Moor, 1646, the King Charles I was defeated, and 3 years later, then in 1649, because he still wasn't willing to come to an agreement, he was then executed. Now, and the Scottish people weren't happy with that, so they tried to put Charles II onto the throne, the son of Charles I, the one of the battles of Nesby and Marston Moor in 1646, and in 1650 there was the Battle of Dunbar, and in 1651 the Battle of Worcester, and in that Charles II was defeated, the same as his father Charles I, by Oliver Cromwell. And then there was another battle, and that was in 1689. Now, Charles II then came back to reign after the Restoration. He was defeated in the battles of Worcester and Dunbar. He fled to Europe, but he came back in the Restoration. He became king, and then one day he died, and his brother James II got to be king, but he was a Catholic. Charles II was not a Catholic. He was a Protestant. So now there was a Catholic on the throne, James II, and the people didn't like that. And the Glorious Revolution happened, and William came onto the throne. William and Mary were then reigning, and James II fled. Now James II wasn't so happy about that, and he had support in Scotland. And in 1689 there was the Battle of Killiecrankie, and there were the Scottish people who were supporting James back onto the throne. They were defeated, and James II tried with the help of a French army to invade Ireland, but he was also defeated in the Battle of Boyne, 1690. And then there was another battle in 1746. The grandson of James II, born Prince Charlie, was trying to come back onto the throne by support of the Scottish clans. They were then also defeated in the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Then there was another battle, that was the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, and that was against the French Navy. And in that Admiral Nelson, he was the leader of a British fleet, of British troops. He died in the battle, but he has a monument at the Battle of Trafalgar, and it's at the Square of Trafalgar in London. And another battle was in the Napoleonic Wars in 1850, and that was at Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo, and there the French troops were also defeated. And then another battle during the First World War was the Battle of the Somme. And on one attack on the morning in July 1916, 60,000 British troops were casualties just on one day in the Battle of Somme in the First World War. And in the Second World War, there was the Battle of Britain in the summer 1940. The German airplanes were attacking Britain and making the Blitz and dropping bombs and all. And the Royal Air Force with the Spitfires and Hurricanes was successfully defeating Britain. And that is according to several pages of the Life in UK Test Handbook, for example 38 and 39. Ireland during the Neolithic Times. The first relics, or the oldest relics in Ireland which are found, are flints near Larne in the northeast of Ireland. They are 8,000 years old. And then 5,000 years ago, the people started to have farms. Now, and the next thing is that when 400 before Christ, the Celts invaded Ireland, and out of that time are many heroic myths of Ireland. Then 500 after Christ, Ireland had a high king callard Rí, and already previously during the time there was Ireland split up in 150 tuatha in kingdoms or clans, and Ireland had then also 5 regions: Munster, Meath, Ulster, Connacht and Leinster. And the high king Ard Rí was ruling from Tara in Leinster. And the people, they were herdsmen or warrior, and they were honouring cows, and also poets, and they had metal pieces like the Tara brooch or the Ardak chalice. And in 432, St. Patrick came to Ireland, and at that time many people became Christians in Ireland. And there were also the monasteries, and for example the Book of Kells was written in the time. Now the people during the Neolithic times, they had barrows or mounds as graves, and also portal graves where there were 3 stones in front of the entrance, and then passage graves. And there's a famous one at Newgrange near Dublin. And that thing is 5,100 years old. And there's a narrow passage leading into the mound, that barrow, to the burial chamber. And there's a little roof box on top of that passage. And the midwinter sun, or the winter sun, can shine through it. And at the winter solstice, on the 21st December 858, when the days are shortest in the winter at that day, and the days are getting longer again from that day onwards, but at that day they are shortest, the sun is shining directly through the roof box up into the burial chamber, where also ornamentations are carved in the stone, which had the ritual significance. And that is according to Miles Kell's World History book on the page 188 and 189. In the year 1685, Charles II, who was the king, died, and he had no legitimate children. So his brother, James II, opened the throne. Charles II was a Protestant, James II a Catholic, and he had 2 eldest daughters who were Protestant. So James II, a Catholic, was ruling a bit Catholic-like. He favored Catholics, and he let bishops of a Protestantistic Church of England arrest, and he allowed Catholic people to become army officers. The people accepted that because they thought after him one of his 2 daughters, the oldest one Mary, would become queen, and his daughters were Protestantistic. So they thought just for intermediate time there would be a Catholic king with James II. But the wife of James II got a son, and now it wasn't clear anymore if the next king might be at the end a Catholic, and the whole country got be recatholicized. And so the Glorious Revolution happened, and in 1688 they invited William of Orange to invade England. William of Orange was the king of the Netherlands. And he could just invade without any fighting because the eldest daughter, Mary, who was a Protestant, did let him in, and they two were married. So the eldest daughter, a Protestant of James II, was married to William of Orange. The people invited William of Orange in, and they then started to rule together without any fighting. So William of Orange ruled together, the king of the Netherlands, with Mary, the eldest daughter of James II, also Protestancy. James II fled to Europe. And that's according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 30.
In the year 1603, Queen Elizabeth I died, and she had no children. So her heir became James VI of Scotland. There wasn't before a James on the throne in England, so he was simultaneously James VI of Scotland and James I of England. Both countries remained separate countries. During the time of James I, James VI, reigns of it's the same person, James VI, James I, there was the King James Bible introduced, and that Bible, it wasn't the first one, but it is written in English, is still used by many Protestant churches today. Now there was a lot of rebellion in Ireland against the Protestant rule of Queen Elizabeth I and also of James I. And the government in London encouraged people to settle in the northern part of Ireland in Ulster, and these settlements were called plantations, and also companies based in London had given land from Ireland. And James I continued this policy, and also in other areas of Ireland land was given. James I, as well as his son, Charles I, believed in the divine rights of kings. That means that they believed that they had a God-given right to rule, and that led to disagreements with the parliament. By Charles I then, that led to the civil wars. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 27 and 28.
The key data of the Belfast City Hall is the name Belfast City Hall, or in Irish Halana Cafra Béal Freiste, or in Ulster Scots Belfast City Hall. Location, it is in Belfast in Northern Ireland. The construction start was in 1898 and construction completed in 1906. It was renovated in 2009. The roof was destroyed during the Second World War, but when later rebuilt. It has a height of 53 meters. The architectural style is Baroque Revival, and the materials used are Portland stone, Carber marble, Pavanazzo marble, and Brescia marble. There are many statues and memorials, for example, the Queen Victoria Monument, Memorial to Sir Edward Harland, Royal Mailship Titanic Memorial, Belfast, Garden of Remembrance and Cenotaph, granite column dedicated to American Expeditionary Force, statue in honor of George Best, the Indian River Memorial, Mary Ann McCracken statue, Winifred Carney statue. And the Durban City Hall, built in 1910 in Durban, South Africa, and the Port of Liverpool building, built in 1903 in Liverpool, the United Kingdom, are almost exact replica. And on the 10, 20, 50 and 100 pound sterling banknotes, which are issued by the Northern Bank, there's the pediment of the building printed.
Newgrange, that is a burial mound, so a little mound, and it is also a passage grave, so there's a passage leading in, a narrow passage to the burial chamber deep inside of Newgrange, which is near Dublin in Ireland, in northwestern Europe. And that thing is 5,100 years old. And on the inside of the burial chamber there are many carved spirals, ornamentation, which had probably a ritual significance. But there's another thing. A bit above the entrance to the long passage into the inside, there's a little roof box, and through that the sun can shine in. And on the 21st of December at 8:58 every year, which is the winter solstice, so the day when there is the shortest time of daylight in the northern half of the earth, on that day, on the 21st December, 8:58, winter solstice, the sun shines directly through the roof box up into the burial chamber. And that is according to Miles Kelly's World History book on page 188 and 189.
In the 1640s, there was civil war in England between the King's army, supported by the Cavaliers, and the Parliamentary army, supported by the Roundheads. In the Battle of Marston Moor and Nesby, the King's army was defeated, and the King was taken prisoner and then executed in 1649. One of the generals of the Parliamentary army was Oliver Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell also was sent to Ireland where rebellion was, and he there smashed the rebellion down. And what did he do with so much violence? That is still a controversial figure in Ireland. Now, I said that Charles I was executed in 1649, and many people in Scotland didn't like that, and they rather wanted now Charles II, the son of Charles I, the one who was executed, on the throne, instead of Oliver Cromwell ruling. And now Oliver Cromwell also defeated the Scottish army, and now Oliver Cromwell was seen as the leader of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. And he then had the title Lord Protector. He ruled for quite some years, and when his son Richard Cromwell followed on the throne, people didn't like how he was ruling so much, and so they invited Charles II in. Charles II, the one who was supported by the Scottish people on the throne, and who was defeated in the battles of Worcester and Dunbar. So after Oliver Cromwell died, his son Richard Cromwell followed onto the throne. The people rather wanted when Charles II onto the throne. They had invited him in. Charles II was the one who was defeated by Oliver Cromwell in the battles of Worcester and Dunbar. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 28, 29 and 30.
Saint Brigid. She lived in the 5th and 6th century in Ireland. During the time Christianity was spreading, more people became Christians, and there was the important figure Saint Patrick, who had a big part in it. And her mother was also converted under Saint Patrick. So Saint Brigid, now the child of her mother, which was converted by Saint Patrick, they both, so her mother and her Saint Brigid, were sold to a landowner as slaves. And when they were living there, but she was giving away, so Saint Brigid, to the poor people and the homeless people and the first travelers, milk and goods, so that they got help. But that brought her into conflict with her landowner, and so she was banned. She then took her vows under St. Patrick and founded a convent. The first convent in Ireland at Kildare. And she then continued to help the poor. She tried to give the blessings to the poor and to expel hardship from the poor. And it was told that at one occasion there came thirsty people, churchmen, and that there wasn't enough to drink, and that she then converted something to beer, and that they had something to drink. And there's some people telling now that because of that, for example, that is one reason why, that she is like the personification of Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that is also why she has another name, Mary of Again. Now, there were some things now a bit taken together with a Druidic figure which had also the name Brigid, and that is celebrated on the 1st February. It's also the feast day of her, the 1st February. She's the patron of poets and of babies and of scholars and of blacksmiths and of dairy workers. And now this festival celebrated on the 1st February, there was celebrated of a Druidic figure, also with the name Brigid, of fire and light and healing. And now on the 2nd February there's Candlemas, and there are some people in Ireland now making a cross out of rushes and putting it at the top of their door to keep away evil spirits. And then St. Brigid is welcomed back again with rekindling the hearth again after the house had been cleaned in the spring. And that is according to Malcolm Day's A Treasury of Saints book on the page 20 and 21. Saint Columba, he lived in the 6th century, and he is the patronage of poets, of bookbinders against floods, and of Scotland and Ireland. Now he was a copyist, he was copying books in the hand. And his former tutor, Saint Finian, had the first copy of Saint Jerome's Book of Psalms. And in secret he started to copy it, and painstakingly copying it. When Saint Finian wanted it back, also the copy, the king also said then that to every cowherd calf, to every book, its copy, so meaning something to it, and they were disputing over it, and it is then told that the dispute enraged so much, aggravated so much, that 3,000 people died in it. He was full of remorse. Saint Columba was full of remorse for it. And he banished himself to a life in exile. And he wanted to convert so many people to Christianity as having died
in that course. When he was 44, he had founded a monastery called Celts in Ireland. He and 12 other companions, each one representing one apostle of Jesus, sailed them to the island Iona, and there they founded a monastery, which became the center for Northern Celtic Christianity. And in its graveyard, there on the island Iona, were many Scottish kings buried, for example Macbeth. And the relics of Saint Columba became also patriotic talisman, and for example 700 years later, by the Battle of Newgrange in 1314, they were carried then with them, and there the Scots, under the leadership of Robert Bruce, won over the English, a very important and deciding battle for many centuries. Now there are 4 things told, some things for example, and the first one is that they were then also going to Scotland, and they were crossing a river, and there was a creature pursuing one of his fellow companions, but he was able to tame the creature. And now about the creature there's some things told, but never that it causes someone harm, so it's tamed. And it's talked about the creature Nessie in Loch Ness. Now another thing was that it was a boar attacking him, and maybe taming didn't work so good or whatever, he killed it with his words. On another occasion, he should have banished the snakes from the island Iona, so that cattle and also humans were safe from snakes. And then on his last day of life, he was weary, but then his white horse leaned its head against him and was whining in distress, and then on the next day, St. Columba died then in peace. That is according to Malcolm Day's Treasury of Saints book on the page 34. St. Patrick. The feast day is the 17th March. He is symbolized in art with a shamrock, or through snakes, or the bishop harp, and he is the patronage of snakes, of snake bites, of excluded people, Ireland and Nigeria. Now, he was living in the 4th or 5th century, and he was living at the western coast of Britain, between the river Clyde and Severn somewhere. And when he was young, he was captured by pirates and brought over to Ireland, where he lived 6 years as a slave. Then he escaped and came back to Britain. And he started to come for training by St. Germanius of Auxerre in Gaul, and he became a bishop. And he went back to Ireland in 432 in his try to convert the people living there to Christianity. Most people there were not Christians, some few people, but most people were not Christians. They were adoring the sun or pagan gods. Now he went, and as previously Palladius, another missionary, he could speak the language, Gaelic, because he lived there for 6 years. And at Easter Eve, he set a fire ablaze, and the Paschal bonfire ablaze, and to show the light to the people, and also confronted the Druid king Lagoguer, and he was able to convince the people to convert to Christianity. In 434, he started to have his episcopal see at Armagh, and he had also help of Saint Brigid. She was also someone trying to help the poor. She founded the first nunnery in Ireland, and towards the end of his life, St. Patrick wrote a big confession in which he described his life as a spiritual journey. Now, there is the picturing of art of him of climbing to Mount Aigil and looking at the fruits of his labor, and something else. There's legend saying that he drove out all the snakes from Ireland, and with holding out his staff. And it's also then depicted in art that he was driving them out as an image, as it is told in the Bible about God in the Genesis, about Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden with snakes. And that is according to Malcolm Day's Treasury of Saints book on the page 33.
The Act of Union of 1800. Ireland was ruled already by monarchs of Britain since Henry VIII, so since 1500 something. But now in the year 1800 there was done the Act of Union of 1800, and with that Ireland became part of altogether, and it was now called United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was then established with the Act of Union of 1800. That were now England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. And they got a flag, and that flag was the Union flag, or also known as the Union Jack. And England has a red cross in front of a white background. Scotland has a diagonal white cross in front of a blue background, and Ireland has a diagonal red cross in front of a white background. And they all three, when together, make up then the Union flag. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 40.
After the Romans had left Britain in 410, other people invaded, the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons. And there were battles fought, but around the year 600, many Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were established in England, not so in Wales and Scotland. And the language which these Anglo-Saxons spoke is the language on which the modern-day English is based. One of these Anglo-Saxon kings is buried in Sutton Hoo, which is in Suffolk, and he was buried with armor and treasure in a wooden ship with an amount of earth over it. And these Anglo-Saxons were not Christians, but it is also the time when missionaries came from Ireland and preached Christianity. For example, St. Patrick, and he would become the patron saint of Ireland, or St. Columba, and he founded a monastery on the island Iona off the coast of Scotland. And someone else, St. Augustine, he led missionaries from Rome and also to preach Christianity. And St. Augustine was then the first Archbishop of Canterbury, according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 14 and 15. The capital cities of the United Kingdom. So of the whole United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, it is London. London is in England. Then there is also Wales. The capital of Wales is Cardiff. And then there's Scotland, and the capital of Scotland is Edinburgh. And then there's Northern Ireland, and the capital city of Northern Ireland is Belfast. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 63. The Celtic origin story of the Irish. There were the Celts living around 2000 years ago in Britain and Ireland, and they had bards and druids telling stories about the origin of the Irish, and they were later written down by Christian monks. It goes like that. There were settlers. They were wiped out by a flood. Then there were male and female gods, the Parthenons. They fought against Fomorian monsters, but were wiped out by the plague. Then there came the Nemedians, also gods, and they were driven out by these Fomorian monsters. Then came the Furbolgs. These were humans with magic skills. And then came the Tuatha De Danann. These were godlike people. They defeated the Furbolgs and the Fomorian monsters. And then came the Children of the Middle, and these are the ancestors of the Celts. And the Tuatha De Danann, they vanished so that they are not longer seen by the Children of the Middle, who are the ancestors of the Celts. But they're still there this time. And these people, they had, for example, Cernusos, that was a god hunting human souls, but they were also doing necklaces, beautiful things out of gold called torque, with twisted gold and so on. This is according to Miles Kelt's World History book on page 214 and 15. The Celts. The earliest origin is known in southwestern Germany in the Danube Valley 3,300 years ago. They were known as the Urnstead culture because they had their deads in urns. Then 2,500 years ago they spread over Europe, to Ireland as Gaels, to England as Britons, and to France as Gauls. And they had then during the Bronze Age the Helsted culture, and then they started to make iron 2,500 years ago, and they were quite good at making things out of iron. They also came into contact with Etruscan and Greek and with the Latin culture, and that brought them into contact with distinctive Celtic spiral motifs, which they used in art and also then in the blue body tattoo at the world, which they had, the warriors, for example. And they valued highly warriors, but also poets, and 800 before Christ there was, for example, on the Isle Iona, and in Ireland, the Book of Kells written. And the poets were writing about heroes and about magic. And their society was organized in clans, highly organized, with a chief clan who was making the laws. And that is according to Miles Kelly's World History book on the pages 210 and 211.
The United Kingdom has 4 big regions. These are England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And all 4 regions have their own flag. England has the St. George flag, and that is the red cross of St. George straight in front of a white background. Scotland has a diagonal cross, the cross of St. Andrew, in front of a blue background. And Northern Ireland has the diagonal cross of St. Patrick in red in front of a white background. And Wales has a red dragon in front of a white and green background. And altogether, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, they have the Union flag, or the Union Jack. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 40.
In the year 1685, Britain was ruled successively for a long time by Protestantistic monarchs. For example, Elizabeth I, James VI, Charles I, Charles II. Now in the year 1685, Charles II died, and he had no legitimate children. So they were all Protestantistic, the previous monarchs. Charles II was Protestantistic, but now his brother got onto the throne because Charles II had no children, no legitimate children. And his brother, James II, was a Catholic. So after all this time and these different monarchs of Protestants on the throne, there was suddenly a Catholic king on the throne. The people thought the next monarch will be a Protestant because the 2 children, the oldest one Mary, of James II were Protestantistic. So James II, the Catholic king now, in 1685, had 2 children, Mary, one of them, and they both were Protestants. Mary was married to William of Orange, the ruler of the Netherlands, who was also Protestant. So James II had an oldest daughter, Mary, a Protestant, who was married to a Protestant, the ruler of the Netherlands. Suddenly, the wife of James II got a son. And now the people thought, what if that son comes onto the throne? That might be a Catholic. And so they decided to invite in William of Orange, the ruler of the Netherlands, to invade Britain. And that happened without any resistance. That is the Glorious Revolution. No fighting happened in England. William of Orange, the Protestantistic ruler of the Netherlands, invaded without any fighting England, and he then started together the ruling with his wife Mary, the oldest Protestantistic daughter of James II. James II fled to Europe. James II wanted the throne back. So he invaded with help of the French army Ireland. But in the Battle of Boyne, they were defeated, and he fled back to France. In Scotland there was also an uprising, but that was in the Battle of Killiecrankie, also defeated. And the Scottish clans, they wanted also James II on the throne. They had to make an oath onto William on the throne. And there were, for example, the MacDonalds of Glenorchy. They didn't want to take the oath and they were massacred. And the remembrance of this massacre means that there are still for quite some time people wanting James back onto the throne. And they were called the Jacobites. And actually, a century later, there was the grandson of James II, his name Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie. And there was now an uprising in Scotland again to get this Bonnie Prince Charlie, the grandson of James II, onto the throne. But that was in the Battle of Culloden defeated, this uprising, and the clans were dissolved, basically. So the chieftains of the clans became landlords, and the clansmen became tenants, and they had to pay to have the land. And also the Highland clearance started, and many of these crofts, these smaller farms, were bundled together to make grazing areas, to make space for large flocks of sheep and cattle. And that is all according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, multiple pages, for example, 30 and 31. The monarchy in Britain. The monarch, which is the king or queen of Britain, represents the country. He welcomes other visitors from other countries, other heads of states, and makes their visits splendid. And he also visits other countries, and then that all happens to strengthen the diplomatic relationships with these other countries. The king of the United Kingdom is King Charles III. He's married to Queen Camilla, and his heir is his eldest son, Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Britain is a constitutional monarchy. So that means in the United Kingdom there are a lot of areas called constituencies, and there the people are all voting, all the people over 18 are voting for a person which becomes the winner of a democratic election. And there's a political party, there are multiple political parties, and the political parties with the most areas in which the people have voted for the person which is part of that political party wins the general election. And the leader of that party is then invited by the monarch and then appointed to become the next prime minister. And that prime minister is then selecting people for his cabinet, his ministers. So the monarch is appointing the person who is the leader of all the persons who have got the most votes in a democratic election of all the people voting in the United Kingdom. From time to time, once a week, for example, the monarch invites the prime minister and then he advises the prime minister, or gives also warnings, and also he encourages the prime minister. And the main role of a monarchy in Britain is to provide stability. Now it is so that the government and also the prime minister changes with the elections and the democratic system. But the monarchy stays, and that gives the people stability and continuity. And the monarchy also gives the people a focus for national identity and pride. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, for example, on the pages 108 and 109. God Save the King is the national anthem of the United Kingdom. And the first verse is, God save our gracious King, long live our noble King. God save the King. Send him victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 109. The Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Parliament. During the 19th century, so 1800 something, there was a rise of nationalism in Ireland. And there were people like the Fenians, and they wanted complete independence of Ireland from the United Kingdom. There were other people like Charles Stuart Parnell, and they wanted Home Rule. Then in 1913, there was in the Parliament in London the Home Rule Bill introduced. And that would mean that Home Rule, that Ireland stays a part of the United Kingdom, but rules itself from home. So on Ireland it would be ruled, but it would be still a part of the United Kingdom. Then 1 year later, in 1940, the First World War broke out, and changes on the government were postponed. Then in 1916 there were Irish nationalists who did not want to wait until changes were made, and the Easter Uprising happened. And that was in Dublin against the British. And that uprising was then defeated, and under military law the leaders of this uprising were executed. Then a guerrilla war followed, and against the British Army and the British police. In 1921 then a peace treaty was signed, and Ireland was splitted in 1922 in the northern part and the southern part. The northern 6 counties, which were mainly Protestantistic, they became Northern Ireland, and the southern part became the Irish Free State, which in 1949 became the Republic of Ireland. And in 1922, when with the splitting of Ireland following the 1921 peace treaty of the guerrilla war starting with 1916 with the uprising, Easter Uprising, then in 1922 the Northern Ireland Assembly was founded. Now it's the Northern Ireland Assembly, but then there was a lot of disagreement. There were people who wanted complete independence, full Irish independence from the UK. And there were people who wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. And now the troubles started. And in these troubles following 1969 and the 1970s and onwards, 3,000 people lost their lives in these troubles. So some people wanted complete independence, other people wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. And in these troubles, when following 1969, around 3,000 people died. And when following the starting of this trouble in 1969, the Northern Ireland Assembly, which was founded in 1922, was suspended. And when the trouble happened, and when in the 90s John Major was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he helped to establish a peace process in Ireland. And when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, and he made the devolved administrations. That means these devolved administrations that there was in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament from 1999, and that they can rule in some areas, and in Wales the Senate, or then known the Welsh Assembly, and they could do some governing in Wales, and then also, following the Good Friday Agreement of 98, the Northern Ireland Parliament was elected in 1999. So during Tony Blair's time when he was Prime Minister, there were devolved administrations established. In Wales, the Senate; in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament; and in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Assembly. And with that Northern Ireland headman, the Northern Ireland Parliament, a parliament was established. The Northern Ireland Assembly was the one from 1922 until 1972, which was when during the Trouble suspended, and then following the Good Friday Agreement of 98, which was more or less a peace treaty. The Good Friday Agreement from 98, the Northern Ireland Parliament was elected in 1999. And that was suspended then in 2002 again, but then re-established in 2007, Northern Ireland Parliament. And today there is the Northern Ireland Parliament. That has 90 members called the MLAs, the Northern Ireland Legislative Assembly. And these 90 people, are voted in on proportional representation. And the ministerial offices are shared between political parties. There's an agreement on that. And they can do governing in health, education, the environment, and agriculture, and social services. These devolved administrations, all three which exist today, the Senate in Wales, the Scottish Parliament in Scotland, and in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Parliament, as they are today, they cannot rule in defence or foreign affairs, and the central government in London has the right to suspend them, as it happened with the Northern Ireland Parliament from 2002 until 2007, but they can govern in education and health or these things. And the paramilitary groups have decommissioned their arms in Northern Ireland and are inactive. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook on several pages, for example 116 and 117. The Northern Ireland Assembly. The Northern Ireland Assembly is the devolved administration in Northern Ireland, in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom there are three devolved administrations. The main government is in London, but then there are other areas, a part of England with London. There is Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And in Wales there is a devolved administration, and that is the Senate. And in Scotland there is the Scottish Parliament, and in Northern Ireland there's the Northern Ireland Assembly. And these three are called devolved administrations. They have also some right to govern. They can't govern in all affairs, like defence or in social security or foreign affairs, where London is governing, or part of the United Kingdom. But in these three other areas, there are these devolved administrations. In the Northern Ireland, it is the Northern Ireland Assembly. And that exists since 1999. And in it are 90 MLAs, are they called, members of Legislative Assembly. And they can govern in areas like education, or the environment, or agriculture, or health and social services. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 160. The Northern Ireland Parliament. The Northern Ireland Parliament existed from 1922 until 1972, for 50 years. Today exists the Northern Ireland Assembly. In the 19th century, there was a growing sense of nationalism in Ireland. And then in 1913, there was a Home Rule Bill introduced in the UK Parliament. So it was so that there were some people who wanted complete independence from the United Kingdom, for example, the Fenians, and there were people like Charles Thomas Parnell who wanted Home Rule. That would mean, and what was when introduced in 1913 in the UK Parliament, that Ireland stays a part of the United Kingdom, but it governs itself. And this Home Rule Bill then was brought into Parliament in 1913, but then rejected. It was postponed, the changes, after the First World War, which then broke out in 1913. But during the Second World War, while it lasted, in 1916 there was the Easter Uprising against the British rule in Northern Ireland. In Dublin was it. The uprising was defeated, and under military law, the leaders of the Easter Uprising 1916 executed. Then followed a guerrilla war against the British Army and the British police in Northern Ireland. Then in 1921, a peace treaty was signed. And then in 1922, Ireland was separated. The northern 6 counties became to be Northern Ireland, and the other ones the Irish Free State. In 1949, that became then the Republic of Ireland. And then in 1922, when this peace treaty was done, where the Northern Ireland Parliament was founded. And that one was there for 50 years until 1972. Now, when it happened that in 1969 and the decades following, the Troubles went on. The Troubles were about that there was disagreement. Some people wanted that the whole of Ireland, full Irish independence, was independent of the United Kingdom. Other people rather wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. And in these Troubles, in these decades after 1969, 3,000 people lost their lives. Now, in this Northern Ireland Parliament, which was then established by the Peace Treaty, 1922, was then 1972 suspended. When in the 90s, John Major was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he helped to establish a peace process. Then Tony Blair got Prime Minister at the end of the 90s, and then Tony Blair, during his premiership, the time that he was Prime Minister, the Good Friday Agreement was done in 1998. And with that, more peace came into the country. And while Tony Blair was Prime Minister, devolved administrations were made. In Wales, the Senate was established, or then known under the Welsh Assembly. So the Senate in Wales, or the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh in Scotland, and then also in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Assembly. And these three devolved administrations have power to rule in some areas. They can't rule in defense, in social security, or in foreign affairs, but they can rule in education and health. Now, and then following the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, there was then in 1999, for the first time, that Northern Ireland Assembly elected. And the people in that they are elected under proportional representation. And how the minister departments are made, that this is on an agreement that the political parties have all the right to it, for some of them. And they can do politics in education and agriculture and the environment, or in health and social services. So, from 1922 until 1972, there was the Northern Ireland Parliament, following the Peace Treaty of 1922, then established after the Troubles broke out in 1969, and then suspended in 1972. And today, since 1999, there is the Northern Ireland Assembly. It was suspended from 2002 to 2007, but it is there. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 160. The Celts. They dominated Central and Western Europe from 650 before Christ until the Roman conquered them, then around up until Christ. And so these were warlike people, and they were a bit organized. So they were the Gauls, for example, in France, or the Britons in England. And these were then the bigger kingdoms, then the smaller districts and chieftainmen, each of these kingdoms. And they are associated a bit with the Hallstatt culture, that is named after a site in Austria, and that was with burials together with horses and wagons and long swords and hill forts. And it was not just in Austria, but also in Bavaria, in Bohemia, and with the long swords up to England. And also associated then with the Latin culture, that is after a place in Switzerland at a lake where between 1909 and 1917 things were found. And that is, for example, then with bronze work and iron, and also curvilinear patterns of decorative style, so spirals and so on, which the Celts then had, for example, with the boat as tattoo on their skin. And so this working. And now that is known about the Celts, that they were doing when bronze work and ironwork, skilled ironworkers and bronze work and gold. And that is according to the Reader's Digest Library of Modern Knowledge, Book 2, Part 8, Man in Society, written by C. Hugh Jocelyn, Emily Kirk, Peter Loyce, Lucy Maire, David Martin, Jacqueline Sesbury, Ruthie Whithouse, and J.C. Woodburn, on the page 448.
In the 19th century, there was a growing sense of nationalism in Ireland. There were people like the Fenians who wanted complete independence from the United Kingdom, and other people like Charles Stuart Parnell who wanted Home Rule. Home Rule would mean that Ireland stays a part of the United Kingdom, but that it has its own parliament and can govern itself. Then in the year 1913, there was a Home Rule bill introduced, but Protestants from Northern Ireland rejected it, and they also threatened to use force against it. Then the First World War broke out in 1914, and the British Parliament decided to postpone decisions on Ireland. During the First World War, when in the year 1916 there was the Easter Rising in Ireland, in Dublin, against the British, the uprising was defeated, and the leader of the Easter Uprising, the
executed. Then a guerrilla war started. In the year 1921, a peace treaty was signed, and in 1922, Ireland became two separate countries. The 6 mostly Protestant counties of the north became Northern Ireland, and the rest of Ireland became the Irish Free State, which then in the year 1949 became the Republic of Ireland. The trouble were then in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, and that was fighting between people who wanted complete Irish independence as one country and other people who wanted to stay in Ireland. Around 3,000 people died in this trouble. And then in the 90s, John Major, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he worked on a peace process, and Tony Blair then, his following Prime Minister, he then made it possible that in 1998 the Good Friday Agreement could be signed. Northern Ireland got the Northern Ireland Assembly and could govern it partly with that itself, and the paramilitary groups decommissioned their arms and are inactive. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook on the pages 47 and 48 and others.
The United Kingdom has 4 big regions, and these are England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And each of these 4 big regions has their own patron saint. These are for England, St. George, Scotland, St. Andrew, Wales, St. David, and Northern Ireland, St. Patrick. And each of these saints has their own patron saint's day, so a day of celebration for the patron. And these are for England, St. George, the 23rd April, Scotland, St. Andrew, the 30th November, Wales, St. David, the 1st March, and Northern Ireland, St. Patrick, the 17th March. In Northern Ireland and in Scotland, these days are official holidays. So England, 23rd April, St. George, Scotland, 30th November, St. Andrew, Wales, St. David, 1st March, and Northern Ireland, 17th March, St. Patrick. And that is according to the Life in UK Test Handbook, page 68. In the 19th century, Ireland was still very much depending on farming. And now, in the middle of the 19th century, there were multiple years in a row where the potato crop failed. The people were very much depending on farming, and potatoes were very important for their diet. And now there was no food. The potato crop failed multiple years in a row. 1 million people died of diseases and starvation. Another 1.5 million left Ireland to England, Scotland, or the United States. And there were large population groups living, for example, in London, Liverpool, Manchester, and Glasgow from Ireland. Also during the 19th century, the nationalist movement gained its strength. There were people supporting the Fenians. They wanted complete independence from the United Kingdom, and other people like Charles Stuart Parnell, they wanted home rule, and that would mean they are still a part of the United Kingdom. Ireland would be still a part of the United Kingdom, but it would rule itself. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 43.
Douglas Hyde, Sean T. O'Kelly, Eamon de Valera, Erskine Hamilton Childers, Sir Paul O'Daly, Patrick Hillary, Mary Robinson, Mary MacLeese, Michael D. Higgins.
When King Henry VIII in the year 1509 came onto the English throne, he continued the policy of his predecessor, Henry VII, of centralizing power. He got more power to the administration in London, and he reduced the power of the nobility. King Henry VIII is known for 2 things mostly. The first one is that he had 6 wives, and the second thing is that he broke off of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, he was married to Catherine of Aragon, and with her he had 1 child, which survived, and her name was Mary. But he wanted a male heir, so he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon. And for that he needed the approval of the Pope, of the Roman Catholic Church in Rome. But the Pope wasn't giving him this approval. And so he broke off of the Roman Catholic Church and founded the Church of England. And he was then the leader of the Church of England. And he could say how people had to worship. And he could also appoint bishops. Now, during the same time, there was in Europe the Reformation. And there were many people who were not satisfied with the Pope and also the practices and ideas of the Roman Catholic Church. They wanted to read the Bible in their own language. not to pray to saints or authors, and it was more important to them their personal relationship with God than to submit to the church. And these Protestantic ideas gained a lot of followers in England, Scotland, and Wales, not so much in Ireland. The English tried to impose Protestantism in Ireland. There followed rebellion and much brutal fighting. Now, after King Henry VIII, his son Edward came onto the throne. Edward was a strong Protestant, and, for example, the Book of Common Prayers was introduced during his reign, which was just 6 years. Now, after then Edward, there was Mary on the throne, and Mary was a Catholic, and she persecuted Protestants, and that is why she has the nickname Bloody Mary. Mary also ruled only shortly, and after her, Elizabeth came onto the throne. She was a Protestant, and she re-established the Church of England. People had to attend the church, but people were not asked what they really believed, and that way she found a way to avoid serious conflict. She tried to find a balance between Catholicism and Protestantism. Elizabeth was loved by many people, and that happened mostly after the defeat of the Spanish Armada in the year 1588. They had been sent out from Spain to restore Catholicism in England, and that all is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 22, 23, 24, and 25. The Siege of Londonderry was in the year 1689, and for 105 days was the Roman Catholic army of James II besieging the garrison Londonderry in Northern Ireland. After 105 days, a naval force relieved the besieged people, and they won basically that siege. And this besieging all contributed to the loss of now James II's Roman Catholic army, then later in the Battle of Boyne. So they were weakened through besieging, which was not successful, over 105 days in 1689. And that is according to History of Mankind on the page 614 of the book Reader's Digest Library of Modern Knowledge, Part 2, Part 11. And that is written by T.F.C. Black, Harold Blackmore, Neil Grant, Robert Lacey, John O'Brien, Jonathan Sumption, Julie Winch, and Esmond Wright. The UK Parliament and the devolved administrations can be visited. And the Parliament, the UK Parliament in London, that can be visited, and people can listen from the public galleries in the House of Commons and House of Lords to the debates. And the entrance is free, but if people haven't had a ticket through, for example, contacting their Member of Parliament, they might have to wait in a queue for 1 or 2 hours. And there are more information at Parliament.uk. Also, Northern Ireland Assembly in Stormont and Belfast can be visited, and people can contact their Member of Legislative Assembly, or they can go to niassembly.gov.uk/visit-and-learning. And also the Scottish Parliament can be visited. People can book tickets, and people can call 0800 or 0800 092 7600, or they can go to visit at parliament.scot, and people can visit the Senate in Cardiff Bay in Wales, and that can happen by booking tours, and people can get information at senate.wales, or they can call 0200 300 6565. And that is according to the Life in the UK Test Handbook, page 122 and 123.
Mainland Portugal has the same time as the United Kingdom. Central Europe is an hour forward to them.